Hi, my name is Mandolin Royal, and I wanted to take some time to explain some of the thought behind how I make selections of the birds from the flock. There are a lot of important traits to consider when you're looking for a breeding stock, and some are more important than others. Some of those traits are age-based and when they are well shown, so it's important to consider the ages of the birds you're going to be sorting through. The birds we're looking at today are a range of ages in these images. Remember that it takes both genders to make the next generation of birds, and that you'll want to consider the other traits being expressed in the opposing gender so that you can better see what is needed in your selections for the gender that you're reviewing. I use a viewing cage with the birds at waist height and separated from each other so that I can see more of their natural movement and stance. Just before I place them into the cage, I handle them all over, feeling for their bone structure and their fleshing. I'll do another video detailing that, as it's very important. I will also weigh them just before they go in for viewing. I give them time to settle into their space, at least 20 minutes or so. The very first thing to look at is their health and vigor. You won't get very far in the breeding adventure without strong birds. Are they alert and trying to be busy in this new space? We don't handle our birds that often, so how did they behave during that experience? Did they put up a strong fight or just passively cope with it? Did they get chatty and loudly protest, or did they instantly resign themselves to whatever fate may await them? Those behaviors can be indicative of strong vigor or weak vigor. Your most animated birds will be your most vigorous birds, loosely speaking. If you come across a weak bird, that should be the end of the evaluation for that bird. Weakness is not something you want to breed forward, no matter what physical traits may be expressed, unless you think you can fix it through the other gender and subsequently select for the stronger offspring from the birds in use for breeding. The route you take in that regard is up to you, though I won't purposefully use a weak bird for the sake of a physical trait. While overall size is a consideration, I don't put all of my focus on that either. The largest bird may have flaws that are more difficult to correct than size. You can always add or reduce size later on in subsequent generations. The main focus is their overall structure and their fleshing. With dual-purpose birds, the meat aspect can be one of the trickier things to achieve. When you handle them, feel for the meat along their keel bone. After you have felt them, then it's time to look at them. How do they stand? Are their legs straight and with a squared-up stance? Watch them move, and use your hand to move them if you need to, so that you can better assess them. Sometimes they will look okay, and then they'll change, and then they'll change again as they move about their space. Watch them long enough to see the truth of it. It's not uncommon for me to stand there staring at chickens for an hour or so. Watch the bird next to them so that you can see where they may be the same or where they may be different from each other. Seek to answer the questions of how do they carry their wings, knowing that the wings should be level to their body and carried tightly, based on what their breed standard says about that. What angle is their tail showing now, knowing that the tail should be at a 45-degree angle and that they may change in time based on their age, again, depending on their breed standard. How balanced do they look overall? Is the back end of the bird showing the same proportions as the front end of the bird, knowing that balance of shape is the ideal goal? While you observe the birds, consider what your flock goals are. At the end of the day, they're your birds to tend every day, so you want to no doubt enjoy them for your own purposes. For us, it's about balance and maintaining the dual-purpose aspects of the variety. Not just the table traits, and not just the laying traits, and not just for their looks. We're after the total package. That means that every season, the list of traits that we're looking for, it changes. It evolves with the flock and with what the flock is showing us they need in order to make them better. We heavily employ compensation mating practices in an effort to achieve balance. That means that if we see the table traits stronger than the laying traits, we select the females with the largest focus on laying. If we see that they're getting too large, we look to reduce the size a little bit. If they start to get too small, then we select to improve the size. If they get too wide or too tall, too short, or too anything, we offset that in our next selection. The offspring will always tell you what's different from the adults. They are your guide and the result of your work in breeding thus far. Ask yourself, are the offspring an improvement over the adults? And if they are, repeat the breeding and also look for where they could be better, as that's the thing that should be on the selection list for the following season. It's incredibly helpful to read the breed standard before you review your birds, every single time, until you have it memorized. This is your guide on what the bird should look like. When terms such as broad, long, or wide are used, that means you're looking at all of your birds and finding who is the broadest, the longest, and the widest among them. By selecting off of that, you will guide the flock through selection to being broader, longer, and wider. When is that too much? When you have overshot those terms when compared to other birds within the same breed, raised elsewhere. At first, you begin with peer against peer within your own flock. You will be amazed at how much your flock can change in just 3 years' time by using selection to guide your breeding choices. Employing compensation mating methods will strengthen your overall results. If the male lacks in chest, then you want to use only your females with the deepest, strongest chest. If you need a fuller tail, then at least one bird within a pair needs to have that fuller tail. If the male has a giant and oversized comb, then the female needs to have a tiny and upright comb. You then sort through the offspring to find the ones that align with what you are hoping to achieve. Bear in mind that it may not pan out, and that's when you repeat the process while using different birds. Setbacks are, of course, part of the process, right along with forward momentum. Be prepared to try a couple of different breeding scenarios within a season in hopes that something hits where you were aiming. It will take time to learn your birds and how they pass forward their traits. It's part of the process and part of the learning required in order to make real progress that you can both see and feel in the offspring. Remember that you can't fix everything within a single season. It helps to pick the one worst thing about the flock at large and set out to choose your breeding birds to fix that. Then you go through the offspring to find the birds that have that improvement, and then you can work on the next thing. I ended up spending 3 seasons on overall balance of structure and fleshing. From there, I went into tails, wings, and combs, and now I'm more into coloring and finer details without losing what we've already worked for. Breeding is a building process, and it's done with incremental improvements over time. Keep an open mind on what your flock may need in order to better reflect their breed standard and your breeding goals. Learn to see what's different, what's the same, from one bird to another. Once you can do that, it becomes much easier to make selections and to guide the flock with forward momentum. Please stay tuned for when I get into the details of handling the birds and what to feel for. Really, that's more important than what can be seen, since the feathers can hide quite a bit. There's a lot to the selection process, spread across many different age groups and the reasons for why and when, so please subscribe so that you don't miss any of it. Hi, my name is Mandolin Royal, and I wanted to take some